Wanted to thank everyone so much for coming and joining us on the March version of the 4 College Golf webinars today. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy Saturdays. I really do appreciate it, and I hope it's worth it. If you have any additional questions to what is presented today, please shoot me an email. I know I've said that a few times, so sorry for sounding like a broken record for some of you, but shoot me an email at mike.smith@forecollegegolf.com, and I'll be happy to answer your questions and help you understand your situation a little bit more. All right. Guys, I'm in it for the juniors, so we're going to get after it today. We got a good crew. This should be pretty fun, so let's get after it. And as you know, sorry, there we go. It's 1:08 right now, Eastern time. We're going to try to be finished in about 30 minutes. So typically, that's a pretty typical conversation for these webinars as well, just FYI. All right, guys. So without further ado, let's talk NCAA eligibility. Let's talk what your timeline could be. I'm going to give you guys a general idea of what an average timeline, if there is such thing. My answer to a lot of those is it depends more often than not. When I have questions and I field questions based on a certain player's recruiting timeline. But I'm going to try to give you guys a general look at that. And I'm also going to tell you today how I think the most effective way to communicate with coaches is, okay? So not pick up the phone and just don't email. We're going to get into the nitty gritty of what that actually takes and what that means and how I've had success myself and how I've told and shown a lot of my players to speak over the phone, to speak to coaches, and had a little bit of success themselves as well, okay? All right, so if anything at all, I want to kind of prepare you guys for today. We're going to be talking about the holistic student athlete as it pertains to college golf. And I wanted to make it a point, and it's probably the most cliche thing in the book, but help you guys understand that it really is student before athlete. And when we talk about eligibility, a lot of those things arise, okay? So before we get started, I typically do a cool, short, fun video. Some of what I say today might be a shock to your system. I have a lot of players that have expectations that are far too high before I start working with them. So if something I say today is a shock to the system, please don't take it as a discouragement or something to say you can't do this. Take it as an opportunity to say, this is where I'm at now, this is my benchmark, and this is where I want to go. And if there's any questions about particular scores, particular benchmarks, particular divisions that you might be looking at, or a particular school even, please shoot me an email, okay? I'd love to talk to you guys about that. I definitely don't want to be the heartbreaker. I was known for it in high, no, just kidding. I don't want to be the guy who, kills everybody's hopes and dreams, but I also want to bring clarity to your situation in the recruiting process. Help you understand where your best fit opportunities might lie, and then give you the tools and the resources to go out and pursue those, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to show you guys a quick video. This one really hit home for me about being a student athlete. It was Mr. Keith Mitchell, I believe, and don't count me on that. I'm still trying to figure out my man's name from last week who won on the PGA Tour. But anyway, Keith talked a lot about being at Georgia, playing with Russell Henley, Harris English, I believe. Don't count me on that either. And I believe Bubba Watson as well, and how his maturation process went and how fast he had to grow up. Guys, this is not a professional photography. It's going to be sideways, but I wanted to show you guys this video because I think the audio is worth more than anything at all. All right, so let's check this out. So he talks about his win, and he talks about what Georgia meant to him. Get this started.
My freshman year at Georgia, I was a true freshman. I mean, I enjoyed college. I didn't know what was going on, the responsibilities, the practices, getting in routines. I didn't have any of that. But thankfully, I had Harris English, Russell Henley, and Hudson Swafford, who were older than me. And thankfully, they were really good at the time because I wasn't very good, and they kind of carried the team. And then when they left, I kind of realized that I had to grow up a little bit because with those 3 guys on the team, I mean, it didn't matter what the 4th and 5th guy were shooting or the guys below that because they were so good. And then you realize you guys, if you're going to be the guy that the team's going to lean on, you have to grow up. And I had to grow up fast. And I did here and there. There was definitely times that I wished I could go back in college and and be a little bit more dedicated. But once I turned pro and you're out here playing for yourself and nobody else, and, you got to pay off your credit card bills, and, it costs a lot of money to do it. It makes you realize, like, wow, you really got to want to do this. You really have to want to play. And thankfully at Georgia, that was kind of our mentality, that we had to qualify every week, and it just made you a better player. I mean, that's why there's so many guys out here that went to Georgia, because nobody ever held our hand. Nobody ever made us practice. Nobody ever gave us lessons on the range. I mean, you were out there and you had to prove yourself from day one. And the only way you could prove yourself was scores on the golf course. They never picked the team and none of that. So I'm thankful for Georgia in that way, because it really made me grow up fast. And it taught me a lot when I turned pro.
So pretty awesome stuff there. And I hope you guys didn't have a crick in your neck by looking at it this way. But what Keith went into speaking about was more, in my opinion, was more about how he matured throughout college. And I think you guys are on the same journey yourselves right now in junior golf. And that's why I wanted to share it with you. And that also is a message just as much for you parents out there as it is for you juniors. The hand holding is pretty much non-existent in college golf. Coach Hackett, Georgia, is notorious for letting his guys loose, basically having a long leash on his players, but allowing them to make their own journey, if you will. They have to play. They have to shoot the numbers. There's no technical help. There's no hand holding. There's no, okay, we'll redshirt you and see how you do next year. It's all a proving ground. And I think the same is true for junior golf. So I just wanted to share that message with you guys before we went in here and talked a little bit about NCAA eligibility. Okay. So the importance of being a student and an athlete. Let's talk about it. For the most part, I want you guys to maybe just basically understand the time constraints of a student athlete. I have a chart. I couldn't find it today. You guys want to email me, I will definitely find it by the end of the day. I got in late and I didn't have a chance to find it. But let's do this in a nutshell, and hopefully I can communicate it just as well as the chart would have shown. So I played at James Madison. And just for a benchmark reference, the NCAA in Division I allows 20 hours per week of golf practice. Okay, that's 20. Now, how many teams do you think go over that? Or how many teams do you think don't reach that benchmark? Just want you guys to brainstorm just for a minute. So, and another thing here is the coaches, the players, everyone on the team will have to sign off on how many hours that is, typically at least once throughout the season. Coach would have us on the bus coming back from a tournament, and we'd sign a paper to say, I authorize that we played 20 hours this week or practiced 20 hours this week. Okay. So the answer to that question is more than 20 hours. Almost every Division I team, and obviously there's weather constraints, there's climate constraints, but for the most part, almost every Division I team, especially at the Power 5 level. And when I say Power 5, I mean the big conferences, SEC, ACC, Big Ten, Pac-12, schools like that. They're going to go over 20 hours. And I'm going to go out on a limb, and I know the NCAA is hopefully not watching this today, although we're talking about eligibility requirements. It's typical that time is going to be in upwards of about 30 hours a week. Okay. So that's the athletic requirements. Okay. So if you're already think you're working hard, think again. And I'm not here to be that shock to the system for you guys. I'm not here to be that cold shower, that ice bath, if you will. But I am here to help you realize that at the next level, if this is what you want and this is what you're pursuing, this is what will happen. Okay. So typically, if you are looking to play at the Division I level, it'll be about 25 to 30 hours a week, okay, in season. And the season runs all year round, pretty much from the last week in August when you go to school until about the first week in November. That's usually when most teams go out of season, and then they start up in season, typically the third week of January or the first week of February, and they end right before exam week, typically in last week of April or first week of May. So just so you guys know. So there's a lot of time there. And obviously, it's not during exam weeks. It's not, most of November you get off, which is nice. And when I say off, I mean you're out of season. So there's only 8 hours typically required per week. And coaches do stick to that 8 hours, I would say more. And the reason why I say they go over 20 hours is not because they're breaking rules. A few of you might have thought that out there. It's not because so much of that. It's because the NCAA counts one round of golf, 18 holes, as 3 hours. And I don't know if you've played enough junior golf events or even been to a college golf event. It's very, very unlikely that any round of golf, maybe even the front 9, lasts about 3 hours. Okay, so that's where you get the extra time. Typically, teams are playing 5-6 times a week. That's adding anywhere from an excess of 5 to 10 hours, I would say, on that requirement. Okay, or on those minimums, I should say. So let's talk about the student side of that. All right. Now, it depends on your major, depends on how highly academic your school is. But I came up with a number, and I took it from coaches, players, about 45 individuals that I've met with. And I asked them, how much of an academic requirement do you think playing Division I sports requires? And we actually decided to break it down by year. So as a freshman, it's typically much, much more, which is why I think you see that. We can call it a dropout rate. We can call it leaving the team. We can call it whatever we want. But typically the most constraints, the biggest demands are on that student athlete freshman year. And that's because athletic departments, for those of you guys that don't know, athletic departments typically have at least requirements for freshmen in study hall. And study hall could be anywhere from 2 hours a week to about 8 hours a week. And sometimes that depends on your GPA. So I think at James Madison, it was, if you kept your GPA above a 3.0 freshman year, you only had 4 hours a week. If it was below a 3.0, you went up to 8 hours. It doubled. And then you would actually go into the Athletic Performance Center, swipe your card. At James Madison, we call it a jack card. Swipe your jack card, stay in for 4 hours, do work, do as much as you can, and obviously, spend that time wisely as a student on the academic side. Okay. So big constraints there. And if you add that up over the course of the week, you really have 2 full-time jobs. We're talking about 2 40-hour-a-week jobs almost. So, golf being, not only the practice being 25 to 30 hours, but the team meetings, the workouts, the travel to and from the golf course. That's stuff that you can't overlook. And on the academic side, study hall. And by the way, I didn't talk about sophomore, junior, senior year. Typically, those study hall hours go away, but obviously, depending on your major, the courses you take, and the academic rigor of your classes, you're going to have extra work, library time, timing groups, stuff like that. Okay, so sorry to jump back and forth, but I wanted to make sure I touched on that. So, guys, understanding that this is being a student athlete and looking at this as a holistic opportunity for you as a junior golfer or as a junior golf parent, that you really have to consider all 3 avenues. And all 3, I haven't even touched on the third, being a student, being an athlete, and also being a social participant, if you will, in that college community. The social side of thing was big for me. Absolutely love my social experience at JMU. A lot of people, when I first committed, it was late, it was in my senior year, but when I first committed, a lot of people said, or asked, why, Mike, why are you going to Virginia to play golf? It's an outdoor sport. Why would you go somewhere where it snows? And it truly was because I had that social component and I had pretty much everything I needed there. And luckily for me, it came true throughout my 4 years at James Madison, which was fabulous. But enough about me. Let's talk about eligibility. Okay, guys? So the main topic today is eligibility. I'm going to try to get through this in 10 minutes or so, talk about timeline. And then after timeline, we're going to go ahead and talk about how to communicate better with coaches, and then open it up for questions for you. All right, so let's talk about eligibility. So what is the NCAA Eligibility Center? It's a great question. I think the best way to sum it up in a nutshell is it's a way for the NCAA to vouch for you to say that you are eligible as a high academic student, as a high-performing athlete, to go and play for a university. Or you could look at it from the university standpoint, or the compliance department, more specifically, standpoint, to say, is this student athlete capable of staying not only in the NCAA, but up to the rigors of my particular college? And there's 2 separate things there. And that's what I want you guys to understand today, is that when we talk about NCAA eligibility, these benchmarks are not for, let's say, Dartmouth or Princeton. Quite quite obvious, right? But any school, and even state schools, these are not benchmarks for a particular school. These are benchmarks for the NCAA. And very much so, those benchmarks are going to be much, much lower than you find the benchmark for the actual admissions process for that school is going to be, okay? So I'll explain that a little bit more later on if you guys have more questions about that. But let's talk about eligibility. When should I sign up? How do I sign up? And how does this process work? What are they going to need from me? As a general rule, unless you're a blue chip recruit, a high academic, someone that's incredibly late to the process, I would sign up with the Eligibility Center right around the beginning of my junior year in high school. Okay, junior year in high school. So if you haven't signed up, you're a junior this year, you're a 2020 recruit, don't freak out. It's totally fine. You're not behind, but I would get on it, okay? We are in March. If you haven't had any action yet, you haven't had any serious recruiting attention, don't freak out, because at the end of the day, the Eligibility Center is for those coaches to find you. And let me not misconstrue this, guys. It's not a portal for them to search you. It's not anything like that. What it is when they know they're actively recruiting a player, they will go on and make sure that player is eligible, run them through their compliance department, run them through their system at their particular school, and then make a decision whether they want to pursue that player or not. And then obviously give the athletic department and the compliance department at their particular school a heads up to say, hey guys, I'm looking at this player. I'm going to need some help vouching their GPA, their SAT scores, their minimum core course requirements, which we'll talk about in a second, when it comes to getting in to that particular school or getting through admissions. Okay, so it's really just and let me walk you through the steps. So typically, a player would sign up. Then the coach is going to search for that player on what they call the guys, I'm totally forgetting. I'm spacing on this name. Okay, I'm sorry. It's a portal where they search for you. Okay, and your number that the NCAA assigns you, that'll be your NCAA ID number for your eligibility. That will be shown on their end, and then they will actually tag you as a interested recruit on there as well. Okay, and this is a total side note, but there's a rule change this year for players that are already in college athletics. If they do want to transfer, there's now what they call a transfer portal. Very, very similar to eligibility. Obviously, a different side of things. You know, that's more so considered a player transferring from one school to the next, not so much a junior player coming in and just being initially eligible. So let's talk about that initial eligibility. What goes into that initial eligibility? Okay, there's three things. Okay. The main three things that go into this is high school GPA, SAT or ACT standardized test scores, and the minimum core course requirements. Okay, and the NCAA has set those out, and I'm going to show you guys those in just a minute. But let's talk about the GPA and the standardized test scores first. What does that mean? What are my minimums? Okay, I believe back in 2015 or 2016, the NCAA changed that over, and now how they view you as a student athlete or a junior golfer coming in and trying to be initially eligible to play college sports is that they're not just going to take your GPA alone and make a decision on you, or just take your SAT score alone and make a decision on you. That might be good for you, that might be bad for you, but let's talk. These benchmarks are typically much, much lower than most of my clients are looking to hit. Because if you're just hitting the minimum benchmarks of the NCAA, you're probably not getting into an elite or a high academic school, okay? And you'll see that in just a minute when I show you the sliding scales and the actual numbers behind the things here, okay? So that's on a sliding scale. So let's talk about that. So the higher your GPA, the lower your ACT or SAT score could be for you to gain initial eligibility. However, the lower your GPA, the higher that SAT or ACT benchmark needs to be. So that's a sliding scale, and it works inversely as well. The higher your SAT or ACT, the lower an acceptable GPA, the lower the acceptable GPA that the NCAA will take, okay? So let's look at actually what that means real quick. I'm going to try to find that for you guys. And then we're going to talk about the minimum core course requirements, because that might have caught you guys off guard as well. All right, I'm going to show you guys really fast here the NCAA eligibility sliding scale for GPA and SAT. All right, let's go ahead and save that. I could have looked for it here, but I didn't want to waste any time. I pulled it up on Google. Let's check it out. So if you guys, oops, sorry about that, guys. That worked earlier today, I promise. You guys want to check it out? It is here on Google. Just type in NCAA sliding scale, and you'll have your numbers. Typically, you'll see that these numbers are much lower benchmarks than anyone's even considering. But if you are struggling in school, or if you have things that you are struggling with, I would check this out just as a general idea. The levels and the sliding scales are much lower for Division II. Division III, I do not believe, has a sliding scale. And also, if you're looking to play at a Division III school, you do not need to register with the NCAA Eligibility Center. Okay. The NAIA schools, if you're looking at a NAIA school, those schools you will have to register, but it's a totally different eligibility center. When we're talking NCAA eligibility, we're just talking Division I and Division II. Okay. And be careful as well when you're hearing some information about when you can contact coaches, when you can make phone calls, when you can send emails. You can send emails at any time. You can obviously make phone calls at any time. But when can a coach initiate conversation with you? That depends on your division. So be careful there as well. And that'll be a conversation for another webinar. If you guys have specific questions, if you're a junior and you haven't contacted coaches yet because you didn't think that you could contact them, in your best opportunity, you can. So contact me, email me. Would love to walk you guys through that process as well. Okay. Let's talk about and let's check out the minimum core course requirements and exactly what that means. Okay. So there's core courses, guys. They're broken down into, let me pull them up here. Broken down to math, English courses, and some others as well. 1 second, guys. Just having a little bit of trouble here today, obviously. We're going to pull it up, and I'm going to show you guys what those core courses actually are, okay? Okay, here we go. Boom. All right, so core course requirements. This is my manual. If any of you guys get bored enough and want to read this, it's 53 pages of pretty much NCAA rules that I wrote back in 2016. Would be happy to send it over to you guys. Just shoot me an email and I can provide that for you. But as you can see, the core course requirements, okay? So there's a couple of things we need to understand about these. One is for Division I and Division II, they are different, okay? And also, we can read this here, effective with the class of 2016, the GPA of core courses. So this is interesting because they're not counting art, home ec, PE. The only courses counted here are these under the core course requirements. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some additional courses that can be considered, but the NCAA does have a list of that. And if you guys want that list, feel free to email me. If you're worried about not meeting these core course requirements, I can definitely send that to you. And I'm sure it's on the NCAA eligibility side as well. And also, when you do go and sign up, they will require you to upload your transcripts to what they call the high school portal. And when you do that, or when your school does that for you, is a better way I should say it, they will tell you how many of those additional courses that you're taking, PE, art, media and design, whatever it is, they'll tell you how many will transfer as core courses, okay? So the core course GPA was raised from a 2 to a 2.3 for full qualifier. So when I speak with coaches, they speak in lingo of full qualifier or not non-qualifier, okay? So ideally, anyone that's meeting these benchmarks, which is typically anyone that's going to go on and play college golf, if you're not meeting these benchmarks, it's very typical that you're a very poor student. And don't know. Hopefully, no one takes offense to that. That's just, if your GPA is not over a 2.3 in high school, then you should really be focusing, in my opinion, on the academic side of things and not so much the athletic side of things. Grades always come first. Your education is most important, guys. So don't forget about that. Okay. So, and then one thing that I want, or two things actually, I want you guys to understand here as well, is that 10 of those 16 core course requirements must be satisfied prior to the end of junior year. So if you're just cruising into senior year and you say, senioritis is not for me, let me go ahead and load up senior year, you're not going to be initially eligible. It's very unlikely that any high school would let you do that or any player would really want to do that. But just keep an eye on that. 10 of those 16 requirements need to be satisfied prior to your junior year, okay? And summer school counts as well, so you can satisfy those requirements in summer school. Okay, so if you're at 9 and you're in your junior year and you're saying, shoot, I just missed the deadline to sign up for these classes, I'm not signed up, these aren't on my schedule, you can do them in summer as well. So keep that in mind. Secondly, 7 of 10 core courses must be from English, math, and science. Pretty interesting. Okay, so even in Division II, we got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 of those must be from English, math, or physical sciences or science, okay? Let's talk about how to communicate with coaches, okay? I'm gonna run you guys through what I call the upfront contract, okay? This was a business sequence, a business idea that I learned at James Madison, and I wanted to share it with you guys because I use it with all my juniors today. I still use it when I talk with coaches. Pretty special thing that I learned. So let's just talk first generally about communicating with coaches. I would say the vast majority of juniors out there only are utilizing what we call the keyboard, okay? And I'm not talking about the keyboard on your iPhone. I'm not talking about, the keyboards anywhere else. I'm talking about sending emails. If you're sending emails and that's your only method of connecting with coaches, you're doing it wrong, okay? Now, if you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old and you're sending emails, I understand that, it might be daunting to develop a relationship with a coach that soon, or maybe even all the way up to 12 or 13 years old. I totally get that. I also understand the argument of, well, a coach cannot call me back until September 1st of my junior year if I'm looking at a Division I school. It's June 15th for those of you curious out there for Division II. They cannot contact you until September 1st of junior year. So why would I email them, or why would I call them even? Great question. I think initiating contact is a great, mature, intentional way to get your foot in the door. So my first plan for today is to really make it known and help you guys understand that it's not about using this. It's not about staying behind the keyboard, not showing your true colors, your personality, your face, and really making a connection with the coach. It's not about that. It's about picking this guy up. Yes, this is a phone. It's about picking that guy up and realizing that those relationships are only going to grow typically, and they will grow the fastest and prosper the fastest if you pick up the phone, introduce yourself, and just ask simply to learn a little bit more about their college golf program. Okay? So that's first and foremost. So let's talk about communication over the phone. I call this my upfront contract. I believe there's 5 components to speaking well over the phone and for really setting up a mature, intentional conversation with college coaches, okay? So if you guys aren't driving or doodling or, I don't know, maybe even playing golf right now, pull out a piece of paper and a pen, write down 1 to 5 vertically on the page, and we're gonna run you guys through these 5 components, okay? First component, time. Okay, I'm gonna run through the 5 first, and then I'll tell you exactly what each means. Second component, purpose of why you're calling. Third component, the coach's agenda or the coach's expectations. Okay. The fourth component is your expectations or your agenda for that phone call. Okay, and then the 5th and final step is take the next step. Okay, so really wanting to ask, what is the next step? Let me explain. Let's start from the top. What is time? Time is simply addressing the amount of time that you'll need today. Let me show you a couple cool tricks, not tricks, but let me say it differently. A couple different ways that we can address time on our phone conversations, okay? I like to say, coach, is now a bad time? And why do you think we say is now a bad time instead of is now a good time? Interesting, right? Well, I call it pattern interrupt. I think as humans, it's very, very likely for us to say no to things, right? It's the flight or flight response. I think we have a lot more flight than we do fight for the most part. So when we're asking coaches now a bad time, our human response is to say no. So that gets our foot in the door right away. Okay, what also is important? To specify the amount of time that we will need. If you're calling to introduce yourself, I typically recommend 10 to 15 minutes. So it would sound something like this. And I'm going to role play with you guys as an audience today a little bit. Coach, you wouldn't happen to have 5 or 10 minutes to talk, would you? Something simple like that, okay? Or Coach, thanks for inviting me in today. I really appreciate the time on the call. Is 10 or 15 minutes okay with you? And then a coach would typically respond, sure, Johnny, I have practiced in about half an hour. 10 or 15 minutes sounds great. Okay, and then you're setting up the conversation in a very mature and intentional way. And I think that's a very underrated part of the process, guys. Especially in this day and age, we want everything right away, instant gratification, and we expect everything to be easy, I think. And things aren't easy. And really the message here that I'm trying to show is that if you don't set these conversations up, and just brainstorm with me a bit while I say this, if you don't set the time, if you don't set the purpose, if you don't set the agenda for the phone call, how do you think that phone call is going to go? How do you think the coaches will respond to that player versus the player that does be intentional and set up the conversation? Okay. And a few little tidbits. How are we doing this? And you'll learn as I speak and help you guys through the upfront contract here, the 5 steps, that it's really about being curious, asking questions, and being intentional with that time that you have. I think too many players get on the phone, expect to either talk for 2 seconds or 2 hours, and nothing in between. And also players call with the thought, this is my last chance. This is my only chance. This is my first impression. This has to go well. And then they work it up so much that they get in their own head, they get ahead of themselves, and they forget to ask the questions they should, or they really don't have that intentional one-on-one, down-to-earth conversation with that particular coach that is really interested in recruiting them. And that's a sad thing. That's what we want to avoid, okay? So let's talk about 2. So time, we're going to ask, Coach, is now a bad time? You wouldn't happen to have 10 or 15 minutes to chat, would you? Okay, great. Good start. Obviously, introducing yourself is a prior step to that. A little bit of chit-chat, a little bit of getting to know each other, perfectly fine. But we're talking about the integral steps of speaking with a coach over the phone, okay? And also, I don't want this to be scripted. This is something you definitely, most 100% definitely need to practice, okay? Step number 2, purpose, okay? We could sit here and put a list of 15, 20 questions together to ask that coach and say, yes, I'm prepared. I know I did my homework. I did my research. I looked at the program. I spoke with other people that knew about the school. I am prepared for this phone call. Good. I think that's smart to talk to other people, but I also don't want you to think that this is a script and you need to have 15 questions ready. You don't, unless it's something you absolutely most 100% feel like you need. Most often, I want you to be intrigued by the conversation. I want you to be attentive to what that coach is saying. And I really like you to ask informative questions based on what that conversation has been so far. Okay, yes, you're going to have your 2 or 3 talking points, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So what is purpose? If I'm calling a coach, for example, for the first time, something I would say is probably this. Coach, I'd like to introduce myself, hopefully help you learn a little bit more about me, and to learn a little bit more about your golf program today. Boom. Short, easy, quick. There's no detail there. There's really no explanation. There's no lengthy process for the coach to listen to understand that. It's just boom, 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 okay? So introducing yourself and learning about the program, probably 2 of the simplest things you could say. And guys and girls and parents, you can tailor this to your own world. It doesn't have to be about introducing yourself, especially if it's not the first phone call. Then we would probably change it to, Coach, I'd like to learn more about the facilities, the guys on the team, what they're majoring in, and potentially even your tournament schedule this coming semester, right? So, something else. So that's purpose, okay? That's going to be a short, detailed message about what the topic of the phone call really not should be, but what you're interested in, okay? And then going to step 3 is more for the coach, all right? So more than anything, I find that players get on and, we don't know anything else to really talk about besides ourselves. And that's not a fault, but it is when you do pick up the phone and you're trying to build a relationship. Okay, so I'm not saying don't ever talk about yourself. Don't sell yourself, although I don't think it's the best to try to sell. But what I'm really saying is put the coach first, put the program first before yourself, and then allow things to fall into place. All right, and what that means is when we're considering coach's agenda or the coach's expectations in this process here, in the communication cycle of the upfront contract, we want to really ask them, Coach, what would you like to talk about today? That's a great way to say it. Or, Coach, when you typically get calls from recruits like myself, and you're going through the process of trying to figure out who you want on your roster, what are those decision-making steps? What does that process look like? That would be a more detailed version of that question, okay? So that's step 3. Step 4 also would be, let me say that again. Step 4 would be how you're coming at it and more of the detail that you're curious about as a player, okay? So putting the coach first in step 3, then coming in and saying, Coach, if it's okay with you, or Coach, if we have time today, would you mind telling me more about your facilities, your workout program, and the academic side of things at so-and-so university? That would be the player's agenda. And you can even get a little bit more detailed. So just to break it down, time, purpose would be the very, very simple, very explicit, right away, this is what I want to talk about today. And step 3, coach's agenda, would be catering to them. And then step 4 is going to be a more detailed version of the purpose, okay? So we're going to be talking about the same thing in step 2 as we do step 4. All right, and guys, I'm gonna sum this up really quickly, really easily, because I saw we went over time. And you know what? The upfront contract is very simple, and it's meant to be a resource that you can use almost every day in everything you do. Okay, so what is step 5? You guys are probably wondering, get to step 5, Mike, come on, please. I'm on the edge of my seat. Step 5 is take the next step. So let me give you an example. Coach, I really appreciate the time today. It was great. I look forward to speaking with you again. Yeah, Johnny, I really liked our time today as well. I would like to speak with you again. I'm interested, and I hope to see you down the road. All right, Coach, thanks for the time. Click. Right, and hanging up. Now, I want to ask that player, and I would love to ask that coach as well, what's the next step? Right? There was none is the answer. So how do we set that up? I'm going to give you guys one simple question and maybe a couple ways to word it. But the simplest question is, Coach, what do you think our next step should be? Or, Coach, do you think we should speak again? Okay, if you're not saying that on the end of a phone call, then you're not setting the next step. There is no follow-up, right? And that scares me. With my guys, when we do call debriefs, that's the first question I ask is, what was the next step with that program? And then we go to, what did you learn? So if I were to rank the 5 steps in order, I would say next step is most important, and setting the time and the purpose are the next 2. Extremely, extremely important. If you're not talking about the finite details about what he wants to talk about and you want to talk about, you might be able to do without it. Maybe. I wouldn't try, but you could probably do without it. If you don't set the next step, you have no future with that coach. You have no future with that program. Okay, and that's a big concern, and it should be. Okay, so that's the upfront contract, guys. I hope you learned a little bit about that. We can talk a little bit more about how to communicate, when to communicate. Just as general rules, in season, I try to catch coaches between about 7:30 a.m. If they're in the same time zone, obviously. Be conscious of the time zones as well. If you're a kid in Florida looking in California, don't be calling coaches at 9 a.m. They won't be up yet. Some of them might. There's probably quite a few, actually, that have morning workouts. But the point is, make sure you're calling at the right time, okay? But for the most part, I would say beginning of the day to about 1 p.m. or 2 p.m., and then I would say middle of the week. So the earlier in the day, the better, and then the more in the middle of the week. Mondays aren't great, Fridays aren't great, because typically most Division I programs, at least, some Division IIs as well, they'll leave on Friday afternoon, they'll travel Saturday, they'll practice on Sunday for a practice round, and then typically 36 Monday, 18 on Tuesday. I've had much more success reaching coaches on Tuesdays than I do Mondays, okay? So just an example out there. I don't think I have any raw data to back that up, but in my thousands and thousands and thousands of phone calls that I've made and the feedback I've gotten from coaches and players, that's the consensus that I've come up with, okay? All right, so I hope that makes sense. Let's give you guys a couple resources now. So when it comes to eligibility, right, we talked about, I'm gonna back up 3 or 4 steps here in the webinar, and give me 2 more minutes, then I'm gonna open it up for questions. When we talk about eligibility, we talk about those lower benchmarks. I might have some high academic players and families on here tonight, and I want to cater to you guys as well. So when you're looking at those eligibility numbers and you're saying, well, I'm 2 points above that in GPA, and I scored 400 points better on the SAT than that benchmark. Okay, great. Well, let's talk about a resource that you can use, all right? So let's go in. I'm going to show you guys one of my favorite resources. So you can find those, obviously, the initial benchmarks on the NCAA Eligibility Center site. And by the way, for those of you guys that don't have it yet, this is the site. You scroll down. If you're young enough, if you're not a junior yet, you can even go down here and create an undecided profile for free. They'll ask you for your information, your contact info, and they'll actually assign you an NCAA ID number. So if you're making a resume and you want to have an ID number, just go ahead and do that. That's a great way to start. If you are already a junior or you're looking to play at a higher level like Division I or Division II, go ahead and create an account. If you're a junior already, you need to get on it. There are some exceptions to that. It's not, the most prevalent thing, relevant thing if you're a late bloomer and you haven't spoken with schools yet. If you haven't talked to anyone yet and you're just getting started, you probably don't need an Eligibility Center account. But as a general rule, junior year is a great time to get started here, okay? All right, so once we log in, once you submit your documents, your GPA, your transcripts from your high school, I should say, and then your SAT or ACT scores if you're a junior and you've taken those, they will ask you for, they'll give you a final decision, okay? And that'll tell you if you're eligible or not. That typically comes during your senior year, okay? So don't be expecting a final decision before you even start talking to coaches or before you even, sign up or take the SAT. All these things have to fall in place with the Eligibility Center before they give you that final decision, okay? And that'll tell you if you're a qualifier or a non-qualifier, okay? That's like we were talking about earlier. But then when we go in and look at that sliding scale of GPA to SAT and we realize, these benchmarks really aren't relevant for me. I'm much more academic than that. Okay, great. Then let's look at where you can look. So let's just say, for example, we want to look at a D3 school called Emory. For those of you in the Georgia area, or for those of you academics that know of Emory, Emory is one of the best schools in the country. Okay, as you can see here, I'm using a resource called niche.com, NICHE.com. Amazing resource. It's actually an amazing resource for the college level, for even the elementary and middle school level. If you're, this is not a webinar for that, and this is a total side note, but if you're looking for schools in your area or schools in the area where you're moving to, niche is the place. When it comes to universities and colleges, it's also the place. So what they'll give you is a report card of the school. We'll give a rating for that particular school. And academics being an A+, as we know, Americans out there, A+ is about as high as we can get. Okay, but really my point is, come down here and look at some of the rankings. This pretty much shows us right away that Emory has amazing professors, a great nursing school, and it's a Christian college. Okay, the acceptance rate of 22, very, very low. Let's see what the national average is. Okay. Sorry, guys. Should have had that typed in already. I believe it's about, this is medical school, so Google didn't do any justice there. I think it's about 59 or 60%. So if we go back and look at Emory, 22% is very, very low. So that tells us Emory is a very difficult school to get into. Okay. And then you can see that as well, reading in between the lines here, reading a little bit deeper, that the SATs, averages. So, and this range means this is the 25th percentile of a standardized distribution, and this is the 75th percentile. So there's actually many, many students in that top 25% that go to Emory that are scoring above 1520 on their SAT. out of 1,600. That's incredible, guys. And a 33 on the ACT. That's incredible. Okay. And then there's a wonderful resource down here. I won't do this to save time, but if you have a niche account, you can log in your high school GPA and your standardized test scores and see on a scatter plot of where you would fit in with all the other accepted applicants and future students to Emory. Okay. Niche is a wonderful resource. I want you guys to utilize this. I think you can even make watch lists as well. You can see things about campus life, school size, earnings after college, and then there's also a review section down here. And I recommend most of my guys go and read the terrible reviews. This isn't about the golf program. This isn't about the athletic department. But what it is about is the social scene, the academic side of things for that school. The other two components of that triangle, if you will, the student, athlete, and social experience, right? We need to know about what's going on in that school. So you can read some excellent reviews. I think that's important, but also go and read the terrible reviews. And if it's something, don't take too much worth in these terrible reviews, but if it's something that really pertains to you or something that you're really concerned about and it's a negative, then I would take that into account. Obviously, go visit the school, see it for yourself. There's no substitute for that whatsoever. But reading the terrible reviews probably are, I would say, very, very integral when understanding the makeup of a school, because those terrible reviews were written by someone who was mad enough or upset enough to get on here and write a review. So it's probably meant something to them. Whereas these very good reviews probably weren't that prevalent. Okay. All right, guys. I want to shut down the webinar today. Thank you guys so much for joining myself for the March version of the For College Golf webinar. We're going to open it up for questions. There's plenty of more dialogue that we're going to get into.